Honest to God, I did not expect things to turn out the way that they did when it came to this movie. So for a little bit of backstory, back in early 2023, DreamWorks announced that they were going to be making a live-action remake of their classic 2010 animated movie, How to Train Your Dragon, a decision that baffled many cartoon fans. Mind you, this was around the time when the backlash surrounding Disney's live-action remakes were really starting to escalate, and now it seemed like DreamWorks were dipping their toes into the live-action remakes. Our skepticism towards such a movie existing would grow even stronger in November of 2024, when the first teaser trailer for the movie would be released, and the movie it seemingly just looked like the exact same movie as the original. Certain scenes just seemed like they were just copied from the original with no changes at all. Notably, the rather cartoony design of Toothless remains exactly the same in this live-action remake. They don't bother to change his design to be like more photorealistic or anything like that. On the one hand, this did make people question even more why this movie exists, why it's going to exist, but on the other hand though, when you look at what Disney is doing with their live-action remakes, all of a sudden you realize, actually no, it's kind of for the better. You know, DreamWorks and Universal are actually doing the smart thing when it comes to Toothless in this new remake. I made a video talking about the original trailer, and I think I might as well just repeat some of the points that I made in that video in this review. A lot of people became scared that DreamWorks was going to start making live-action remakes of their own animated movies like Disney was doing, and I didn't see that at all, because unlike with Disney, there were very few DreamWorks movies that could hypothetically translate into live action. How to Train Your Dragon is like one of the only DreamWorks movies that could translate into live action. It's also one of the few popular DreamWorks movies that could hypothetically translate into live action. Let me explain what I mean by that. Because I'm a massive dork, I went out of my way to manually tier list every DreamWorks movie based solely on how they could translate into live action, and guess what? A majority of their movies, they cannot translate into live action at all. The few DreamWorks movies that could hypothetically work in live action are like the niche forgotten movies mostly. At best, you have cult classics like Megamind and Rise of the Guardians, and at worst, you have movies that literally nobody remembers, like Home or Abominable. I could kind of see Shrek being made into live action. I don't know why. I guess it's because we got a musical, and it's like, you know, if we got a musical of Shrek, I guess it's not impossible to make a live-action remake of Shrek. I don't know. I'm not saying I want a live-action remake of Shrek to happen. Lord knows what kind of abomination that would turn out to be. But I guess it's not, like, super impossible for it to get a live-action remake. I don't know why, but I have this really specific gut feeling that if DreamWorks ever made a live-action remake of Shrek, they would only do the first Shrek movie. I don't know why I don't see them doing live-action remakes of the other Shrek movies. I don't see them doing live-action remakes of Shrek 2 or Shrek the Third or anything like that. I definitely don't see them making live-action remakes of the Puss in Boots movies. I'm not gonna lie, there's a small, sick, cynical part of me that wants to see them try and make a live-action remake of Puss in Boots The Last Wish, just because I know the most annoying people in the world are gonna get mad at such a movie existing. Besides How to Train Your Dragon and the first Shrek, there's no other big DreamWorks movie that can work in live action. How the hell could they make Madagascar in live action? How the hell could they make Kung Fu Panda in live action? How the hell can they make Trolls in live action? How the hell can they make The Boss Baby in live action? The difference between Disney and DreamWorks is that DreamWorks movies are a lot cartoonier than Disney movies, and so as a result of that, it's harder to translate them into live action. Like, I'm sorry, but it would be straight up impossible to make a live action remake of Over the Hedge. Like, that's never gonna happen. How to Train Your Dragon is one of the few DreamWorks movies that could successfully translate into live action, and also more specifically, it's one of the few successful DreamWorks movies that could hypothetically translate into live action. I had a hard time getting mad at this movie. I didn't think it was a movie that needed to exist or anything like that, but I had a hard time getting mad at this movie because I thought, this was just going to be a one-time thing and that was it. And then they announced they were making a sequel, a live-action remake of How to Train Your Dragon 2 in 2027. And then I became a tiny bit more skeptical. I was like, okay, they're going to remake the entire trilogy. Okay, I guess. They're just going to jump the gun and assume this first movie will be successful upon release, and they're going to immediately start work on a sequel. Okay then, very bold move, but whatever. And now I feel like this is a very relevant thing for me to bring up. Earlier this year, before this How to Train Your Dragon remake came out, Disney put out 2 live-action remakes of their own animated movies, Snow White and Lilo and Stitch. And both of these movies, especially Snow White, were criticized for the massive changes that they made to their original movies. The Snow White remake bombed at the box office because of these changes. Well, actually no, there were several things that caused it to bomb at the box office, but the changes were definitely one of them. The changes were among those that contributed to the movie's failure. And Lilo and Stitch has proven to be a massively successful movie. It is far from a flop, and yet it's also been criticized by people for the changes that it makes to the original animated movie. And then we arrived closer and closer to the release of this How to Train Your Dragon remake, and I was shocked to see how great the reception for this movie was. I remember I was bored on Letterboxd and I decided to look up the movie, like its ratings, its early ratings on Letterboxd, because I believe this movie opened up internationally in certain markets before it opened up here in the US, and I saw the reviews were really good. The ratings were really good. There were a lot of 5-star, 4-star ratings for this movie, which completely caught me off guard. I went onto IMDb. I saw the movie had an 8.2 out of 10, which is again really high. And something that I saw with the reviews was that people mentioned this movie is exactly the same as the original. Shot for shot, it is down to a T, a remake, a perfect recreation of the original animated movie. It doesn't change anything at all from the original animated movie. And I feel like that little tidbit could open up a whole can of worms potentially. On the one hand, the fact that our suspicions were true and this movie was indeed going to be exactly the same as the original movie would make it very questionable as to why this movie exists in the first place. It would make the movie unnecessary. On the other hand, though, the original How to Train Your Dragon is a widely beloved movie, and the fact that this remake plays it extremely safe, maybe a little bit too safe, and just does the exact same thing the original movie did but in live action, it'll make the existence of the movie very debatable, but that means it'll end up being a massive success with audiences. And as I mentioned before, that was the case. You go onto the movie's review pages now after it's been released properly. You go onto Letterboxd, it has a really high score. There are tons of 4-star, 5-star ratings. You go onto IMDb, it has an 8.1 right now. It's still in the 8.0 range. You go onto Rotten Tomatoes, the movie has I think 78% on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't remember what it was. It's certified fresh. It does have a good score, but the audience score is 98% at the time of recording this, and at one point when it debuted, the audience score debuted with a 99%, which is insane. I'm just gonna preface this by saying, whether you like it or not, this movie is going to be massively successful. This will be one of the biggest movies of the summer. This will be one of the biggest movies of 2025 because it is a massive crowd pleaser. I already said this in the Lilo and Stitch review, and I'm going to repeat it here again because I think it's relevant here as well. The internet is not real life. The views of the animation is cinema cult do not accurately reflect the views of the general public. By playing it extremely safe and just making the exact same movie that they made back in 2010 except in live action, it makes the existence of the movie very debatable, but it also prevents any controversies from happening. I want to imagine the people at DreamWorks and Universal were looking at Disney's Snow White remake and the millions and millions of controversies surrounding it, and they were just thinking to themselves, thank God that's not gonna happen with our movie. We didn't dodge a bullet, we dodged a nuke, especially given the fact that the original How to Train Your Dragon is, I want to say, a more popular, beloved movie than the original Snow White. Yes, the original Snow White is more historically important. Yes, I know How to Train Your Dragon wouldn't exist without Snow White, I get it. But How to Train Your Dragon definitely has a massive appeal towards younger generations. That was another one of the big reasons why Snow White bombed. It's because it's a remake of a movie from the 1930s, and so it has like almost no appeal towards millennials or Gen Z. This was the advantage that Lilo and Stitch had. This is one of the reasons why Lilo and Stitch is successful while Snow White bombed. Lilo and Stitch is a movie that is popular amongst millennials and Gen Z. Snow White isn't. And How to Train Your Dragon is also popular amongst millennials and Gen Z. Both this and Lilo and Stitch have that nostalgia advantage that Snow White didn't have. Alright, I think I've delayed the inevitable long enough. What are my thoughts on the movie? Well, the original How to Train Your Dragon is a masterpiece, and this movie just does the exact same things that the original How to Train Your Dragon did, except it's in live action. And I can't believe I'm saying this. This movie is f***ing amazing. I love this movie. It's so f***ing good. I'm not even joking. I know what people are going to say. I know people are going to think I'm becoming a corporate shill now just because I said a live action remake is good. I know people are going to accuse me of being biased. You know, they're going to say I'm a hypocrite or whatever. They're going to be like, oh, of course, you know, you prefer DreamWorks over Disney, so of course you're going to think a DreamWorks live-action remake is better than a Disney live-action remake. What happened to animation is cinema, man. And, well, to that I say, first of all, in regards to the last question, I distance myself away from that cult, and I regret joining it. 2023 me and 2025 me are two completely different people. I promise you, when you realize animation is not the only thing in the world that matters, animation is not the only valid art form, then you become a better person. You're able to live life better, trust me. And also, I have my reasons as to why this movie works, while Disney's live-action remakes don't work. I acknowledged when I reviewed Lilo and Stitch that there were several advantages over it when compared to the Snow White remake, and now here I am acknowledging the advantages that How to Train Your Dragon remake has over the Lilo and Stitch remake, the Snow White remake, and almost every live-action Disney remake in general. Just hear me out, please, okay? Hear me out. I will acknowledge that from a conceptual perspective, this movie is terrible. This movie is awful. This movie has no reason to exist at all. It is an unnecessary cash grab. But in terms of looking at this movie as a movie, ignoring the idea behind this movie's existence, and just focusing on the way that it turned out, I think it turned out great, honestly. I think it turned out amazingly. When it comes to these live-action remakes, everyone always focuses on the idea of them existing, and yet no one ever really focuses on the way that they're executed, which, I mean, I can kind of understand why. Most of these movies are pretty f***ing bad. A movie like Snow White is awful from both a conceptual perspective and from an execution perspective. But then meanwhile, you have movies like Cinderella 2015 and The Jungle Book 2016, which maybe they might be bad in concept as well, but the execution could be good. I have seen a lot of people say that these are the only good live action remakes, and well, I don't know if I can verify that. I've never seen Cinderella 2015, and I watched Jungle Book 2016 when it came out all the way back in theaters in 2016. I barely remember anything about it. But maybe these movies are not bad from an execution perspective. They're just not good from a conceptual perspective. And I guess that's kind of the thing for any movie, original or not. It's all about the execution. And so it just leaves me wondering, what do I do with this movie? Do I prioritize the admittedly creatively bankrupt nature of this movie's existence, or do I prioritize the stellar execution of the final movie? As I mentioned before, it's all about the execution, so allow me to go over the many advantages that this movie has over Disney's live-action remakes. For starters, I feel like the story of How to Train Your Dragon is able to translate into live-action better than a lot of Disney movies. There are certain stories that can only work in animation and not in live-action. And then there are certain stories that can only work in live action and not in animation. And How to Train Your Dragon is a story that can work in both art forms. I think what helps is the fact that How to Train Your Dragon is not like a super cartoony movie or anything like that. As I alluded to briefly at the beginning of this video, one of the biggest criticisms that people have for the live-action Disney remakes is the fact that they take away all of the cartoony charm that the original animated movies had, and they make them all photorealistic. They make everything photorealistic, and it just looks boring and dull. It's like, look at Lion King 1994, and then look at Lion King 2019, you know? Which one looks more appealing to you? Which one would you be more willing to watch? They managed to somewhat avoid this with the Lilo and Stitch remake, as Stitch still looks absolutely adorable in this remake, and then they just completely screw it up with Jumba and Pleakley, who both look awful in this remake. How to Train Your Dragon doesn't have that cartoony feel. It doesn't have as many cartoony elements as most Disney movies do, if that makes sense. The main setting of How to Train Your Dragon is the island of Berk, which for the most part does look realistic. There's nothing like cartoony or out of place about it. The only thing that's cartoony about the original How to Train Your Dragon is the design of Toothless, and they keep him exactly the same in this remake. He still looks exactly the same. He still looks cartoony in this remake. And that is another advantage that this movie has. When I reviewed Lilo and Stitch, I brought up how one of the biggest advantages for that movie was the fact that Stitch still looked adorable like in the original animated movie. If they changed Stitch's design, let me tell you something, it would have been a disaster. I mean, yeah, the movie ended up being controversial, but it would have been even more controversial than it already is if they changed Stitch's design. And the same thing would have happened with if they changed Toothless's design in this live-action How to Train Your Dragon remake. Nobody would go and watch this movie if Toothless looked like a boring photorealistic dragon. The only thing that was really cartoony about the original animated movie, and they keep him cartoony in the live-action remake. All of this means that the movie doesn't suffer the same soulless vibe that you get from a lot of live-action Disney remakes, where it's trying to be like the original animated movie, and then it's like, it just doesn't feel the same. It's like a shell of its former self. It doesn't work. You're taking something that's cartoony and colorful and you're making it boring and dull. The original How to Train Your Dragon, I don't want to call boring and dull, but it's most definitely not cartoony or colorful either. And so I feel like it's able to translate into live action much better. Another big reason why I think this movie is able to translate into live action a lot better than Disney's live action remakes is the fact that, I gotta be honest with y'all, I didn't even notice this until I was halfway into the movie, but midway into the movie, it dawned on me why this movie worked in live action while something like Beauty and the Beast didn't. How to Train Your Dragon is a much more action-oriented movie. I don't know if that's really the right term to use, but like it's intense. It has intense scenes in it, and I feel like these intense scenes help make the movie translate into live action better. There are no intense moments in like The Little Mermaid or Snow White or anything like that. Okay, maybe there are like a few, but not that many. But generally, these movies are not very tense filled. They're not action oriented, obviously. And I don't know what it is, but I feel like the kind of action-oriented nature of How to Train Your Dragon allows for it to translate into live action significantly better. The fact that it has a more like intense feel to it when compared to like Snow White, for example. You think about that iconic test flight scene where Hiccup flies at Toothless for the first time. It's meant to be a fun, fast-paced scene, and it's executed perfectly in both the animated movie and the live-action remake. I don't know how I can further elaborate on this, but like surely it'll make sense. The more action-oriented, intense nature of How to Train Your Dragon allows for it to feel more natural in live action compared to Beauty and the Beast or anything like that, Dumbo, you know? Those feel a lot more awkward in live action, whereas How to Train Your Dragon fits perfectly into live action and animation together. The final big advantage that this movie has over the live action Disney remakes is the fact that it is exactly the same movie as the original How to Train Your Dragon from 2010. Now, I have seen people say that this is a bad thing. I have seen people say that this ruins the movie. This is like a bad thing. It doesn't ruin the movie, but it makes the movie unnecessary, and it has no reason to exist. And I mean, listen, I have nothing against people that don't like the movie, but like, why the do you all want this to be another Snow White? Is that really what you want? Is that what you want? Do you want another Snow White on your hands? Honestly. Every iconic scene from the original movie is in this movie, and it's executed perfectly. It's the exact same story that we all know and love. There are zero changes to the plot, and in the event that there were any changes that were made from the original movie story-wise, it didn't affect the overall experience. If there's one thing that I will criticize about this movie, it's that sometimes it doesn't feel like I'm watching a real movie. I think I brought this up when I reviewed the first trailer for the movie back in November of 2024, when I made my video on the first trailer. The movie had this like vibe to it, this like fake fan-made live-action How to Train Your Dragon vibe to it. I don't know how to describe it. I'm sure most of you remember like back in the early 2010s or so on YouTube, you'd watch like fan films and like shorts and whatever, fan-made trailers for like live-action versions of movies and whatnot. Like, I don't know how many of you are going to remember this, but there was like a Sonic fan film that came out in like 2013 or so, 2012, and I kind of get that same vibe from the How to Train Your Dragon remake in, you know, watching it. It reminds me a little bit of that Sonic fan film, just like that sort of like fan-made feel to it. I don't know. Surprisingly enough, I never really got this vibe from any of Disney's live-action remakes. I never got this vibe from the Snow White remake or the Lilo and Stitch remake or the Little Mermaid remake. So there you have it. Probably the only thing that the live-action Disney remakes have over the How to Train Your Dragon remake. Even then, though, there are still tons of moments where I feel like I'm watching a real, proper movie, with the same storyline from the original movie completely intact. We all know what they say. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That is advice that Disney really needs to follow. Now, because this movie is exactly the same as the original animated movie, this has led to people speculating, is this what the live-action remake should be like? Comparing this to Lilo and Stitch, which I guess it's mostly similar to the original animated movie, but it has a lot of key differences, the main one being Nani doesn't keep Lilo at the end of the movie. Some people could make the argument that by making the exact same movie, except in live action, it's just an unnecessary waste of time. You're not doing anything new, you're not doing anything different, you're not adding anything new to the table, there's nothing to make it very fresh, it's just you're making the same movie, except now it's slightly inferior. And then like, if you take that risk and you change stuff from the original movie, then that would help make it more, it would give it more of its own identity, you know? You know, you look at Lilo and Stitch and it's like, the animated one has Nani keep Lilo, the live action one doesn't. You know, it helps differentiate the two. On the other hand though, by changing certain elements from the original movie, especially if it's stuff that's very important to the original movie, you run the risk of making people not want to go and see this movie. Because depending on the changes, they can negatively affect the experience. The Lilo and Stitch remake has proven to be a very successful movie, but I want to imagine there were a good amount of people that were turned away from watching it because of the changes that it makes from the original movie. And then meanwhile, if you do what How to Train Your Dragon did, and just have it be the exact same movie as the original, with no changes to the storyline or the characters or anything like that, it makes the existence of the movie even more questionable, but it ends up being a much bigger crowd pleaser. It ends up being more of a crowd pleaser. Audiences are going to be more satisfied with the movie, because it's the same thing. Again, as I said before, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm pretty sure both sides of the argument could agree that these movies don't have any reason to exist, but they're still gonna make them because that's just how it is. They keep making money, why the hell would they stop? I must remind you, the internet is not real life. The internet does not represent the real world. These movies, for the most part, are intended to be crowd pleasers. I want to imagine there were a lot of people that went to go and see this movie because they were nostalgic for the original How to Train Your Dragon from 2010, and they wanted to relive their childhood movie on the big screen in live action. And these people probably have kids of their own, and so they're going to want their kids to grow up with like the new generation version of How to Train Your Dragon. That's always been the main thing with these movies. Nostalgia sells. It didn't sell for Snow White because nobody's f***ing nostalgic for Snow White. The people that are nostalgic for Snow White are all 6 feet underground. Nobody has nostalgia for a movie from f***ing 1937. Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon, however you may feel about them, are more successful because audiences love the original animated versions of these movies. They are highly nostalgic for them. It's no surprise that these end up being massively successful at the box office. That's just how it is. I know Lilo and Stitch is a significantly bigger movie than How to Train Your Dragon, but I'm not gonna lie, I thought this remake would make more money than the Lilo and Stitch remake. I mean, it's already made a lot of money, but I thought it would have surpassed it just because of how amazing the audience reception to this movie is. I would have thought that the negative word of mouth surrounding the changes that the Lilo and Stitch remake makes to the original, combined with the positive word of mouth from audiences for How to Train Your Dragon, for the complete opposite reasons, would have affected the performance of Lilo and Stitch, but it didn't. Lilo and Stitch is definitely going to make a lot more money. Again, I know Lilo and Stitch is a more popular movie than How to Train Your Dragon, but still. This movie set out to do one thing, and only one thing. Please the audience. Please the people that grew up with the original animated movie, and have them relive their childhood, and have their children live through their childhood, you know, create memories of their own. I'm sorry, but I don't find it surprising in the slightest that audiences are choosing to watch a live-action remake of a beloved animated movie that has tons and tons of nostalgia value and is extremely faithful to said animated movie. I'm not surprised in the slightest that they're choosing to watch that over art house indie movie about depression number 15 trillion. That's such a shocker, guys. I can't believe it. Why would audiences go and see this movie instead of indie movie about depression number 15 kajillion? This is why Hollywood is dying. Again, I will acknowledge that from a creative perspective, this movie is terrible. From an execution perspective, though, this movie is excellent. And if you ask me, when it comes to a movie, it's all about the execution. I've gone on before about how a movie being original does not automatically make it good. Like last year you had Megalopolis. That's a completely original movie, and it's also fucking terrible despite that. In the same way, a movie being original does not automatically make it good. A movie being a pointless sequel or remake does not make it bad. This movie is unnecessary and it's good at the same time. It can simultaneously be both. A movie being a sequel or a remake or an adaptation of an already existing story, just a movie not being original does not automatically make it bad. Because going by that logic, the animated How to Train Your Dragon is a bad movie as well. Because guess what? It's not an original story either. How to Train Your Dragon started off as a book series in the early 2000s. So if you're gonna criticize the live action movie for not being original, then you should also criticize the animated movie for not being original either. Some of the most beloved movies of all time are not original movies. They are adaptations of books. Movies like Fight Club and No Country for Old Men, widely beloved, critically acclaimed movies, considered some of the greatest movies ever made. And they're not original. They're adaptations of books, and I guess that makes them bad movies now all of a sudden. Film bros and cinephiles are f***ing seething just hearing about this news, that no, American Psycho is not an original movie. It's based on a book. I would hate to see the look on all of your faces when you find out about Lord of the Rings. Holy crap, man, you're not ready for that one. You're not ready for that one at all. Next year, Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey comes out, and it is easily one of the most highly anticipated movies of 2026. There are so many people, myself included, that's looking forward to this movie, and guess what? It's not an original movie either. It's an adaptation of a pre-existing story. It's not an original movie. That means the movie's gonna be bad. That means the movie's gonna suck. Sorry, guys. God damn, even cinema's savior is contributing to the problem. Ain't that a shame? I know people are gonna bring up Sinners, and I say this as someone that loves Sinners. I say this as someone that considers Sinners to be the best movie of the year. Sinners is the exception and not the norm. I would love to have more movies like Sinners come out. I would love to have more completely original movies that are successful at the box office despite that, on top of being genuinely great movies, because I don't think anyone would want a movie like Megalopolis to be successful. Ugh, God no. Sinners is the exception and not the norm. I wish it was the norm, but unfortunately, it's not. I know that people are also going to bring up Elio as well, and listen, I liked Elio. I thought it was a cute movie, and yet I kinda understand why it's not doing very well at the box office. It's an original movie, but it's not an original movie. It's original in the sense that it's not a sequel or an adaptation or anything like that, but it's not a very unique, remarkable movie or anything like that. There's nothing to make it special. There's nothing to make it stand out at all. How to Train Your Dragon and Lilo and Stitch have that nostalgia advantage, and looking through the perspective of general audiences and not from my perspective, they just looked like more interesting movies. Audiences have been given no reason to see Elio instead of either of these movies. It's animated and it's an original story are not good enough reasons to convince people to see Elio instead of How to Train Your Dragon. Again, the internet is not real life. It's not a super unique, remarkable movie or anything like that. I liked it, it's cute, but it's not a perfect movie either. And it would need it to blow people's minds away in order to convince them to go and see it, in order to have the movie be as successful as Lilo and Stitch or How to Train Your Dragon. How to Train Your Dragon is a rare example of an admittedly pointless remake being good. It doesn't have any reason to exist at all, but you know, at least it's good. Obviously, it's not as good as the animated movie, but that's more in the sense of like, the original movie, the animated movie, is a 10 out of 10, while the live action remake is a 9 out of 10. If the animated film came out this year and the live action film came out in 2010, I guarantee you people would have the opposite reaction to both movies. I could very easily imagine an alternate universe where people are criticizing DreamWorks and Universal for making a pointless animated remake of a beloved live action movie that tons of people in the early 2010s grew up with. I can already envision how great the comment section for this video will be. I can already imagine all of the comments that I will get from this video telling me stuff like, oh, you're biased, you only like this movie because it's from DreamWorks and not Disney. How dare you say that a live action remake is good? How dare you like a live action remake? You're a fake animation fan. Animation is cinema. Animation good. Live action bad. Talentless hack is saving animation. And it's like, bro, I just like a movie. And that's it. It's not the fucking end of the world, okay? There is so much important shit going on in the world. Stuff that's actually like worth your time. Stuff that's worth getting angry at. And you're wasting your time getting angry at me for committing the horrible crime that is liking a movie. Jesus Christ, man, seriously. This movie set out to be a massive crowd pleaser, and it ended up being a massive crowd pleaser. It has succeeded in that aspect. Audiences loved it, and I personally love it as well. I can understand why people don't like this movie, but I feel like they should understand why it's successful, and why it's gotten significantly better reviews than Disney's live-action remakes. Like, genuinely, there is such a massive difference between this and Snow White, I swear. Just because they're both live-action remakes doesn't mean they're the same. There is a massive difference between these two movies, I swear to y'all. Oh yeah, funny story. I came across this YouTuber who made a review of this movie, this How to Train Your Dragon remake, and I'm not gonna name names or anything like that. I'm not gonna say the name of the channel, but they made a negative review of the How to Train Your Dragon remake. And it's like, okay, that's fine. I can understand why someone would not like this movie. And then they proceeded to say that the movie was worse than both the Snow White and Lilo and Stitch remakes, which, no man, no, that's just objectively incorrect. I'm sorry. This same guy also made videos talking about Snow White and Lilo and Stitch, and indeed, he gave these movies higher scores. If I remember, he gave How to Train Your Dragon like a 4 out of 10, and then he gave Snow White a 5 out of 10, and then he gave Lilo and Stitch a 6 out of 10, which I know those aren't exactly high glowing reviews, but the idea of giving Snow White, f***ing Snow White, a higher score than How to Train Your Dragon is insane to me. Even if it's just 1 point higher, it's like, still. Thinking that Snow White is better or not as bad as How to Train Your Dragon is insane. I know that it's his opinion and I should respect that and whatever, but like, there's opinions and then there's bad takes. Saying you don't like the How to Train Your Dragon remake is an opinion. Saying it's worse than f***ing Snow White is a bad take. It's just as simple as that. Anyways, that's about it. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to like, and if you're new to the channel, maybe consider subscribing, as it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you everyone for watching this video, and I will see y'all next time. Adios.